And then in 2017, I started again.
All right. Well, and here the game is finally starting. Magnus, not visible yet. Do we have the Spanish opening?
We don't have the Spanish opening, although all of White's moves would be played if it were a Spanish opening. Instead, though, Black on the first move pushing his c-pawn forward, which means the Sicilian defense, one of the most dynamic openings in chess. Black often trying to counterattack, just creating some imbalance with the pawns. And talking of pawn imbalances, we've seen a pawn sacrifice already. It's only move 7. White is a pawn down, but look at Black's pawn structure. It is weak. And we actually saw this early in the tournament, Ivanka, in a clash between Magnus Carlsen as Black and Levon Aronian. That one ended up in a crazy game, but fizzling out to a draw eventually. And this one, Jan clearly having studied Magnus's previous game, maybe he's come armed with an improvement, armed with a new idea to try and destabilise Magnus, to try and throw him off. Meanwhile, brave from Carlsen to repeat exactly what he's done before earlier in the tournament.
Yeah, very brave. It just shows that he's confident in his preparation. And the newish move was actually moving the rook to the centre, attacking, well, eyeing up the pawn, and now moving the knight to the edge of the board. OK, that's not the most popular choice. It's been played before.
Yeah, and White's compensation for the pawn does lie in the fact that Black's pawn structure is just ugly, and Magnus, instead of trying to keep his pawns guarded in the centre of the board, giving the pawn back. Is that surprising to you two? There, Magnus just giving the pawn back, and OK, Jan establishing a strong white knight in the centre, and Magnus doing the same with his own knight, and the white knights guarding each other. Black finally castling. Oof. Personally, I would be terrified of Black's pawn structure. If you look at the C file, Black has these 2 doubled pawns, and long term they are targets. Short term, at least, Magnus has the 2 bishops, and the potential of those 2 bishops might later balance out, losing a pawn or at least having that compromised structure.
It's quite interesting. No games have ever been played in this particular variation, but of course it has been analysed. Someone had a look at it in 2019.
Ooh.
Another person had a look at it in 2022, in January, though.
OK.
So, OK.
Wow.
And in the January analysis actually runs with White developing the queen diagonally, 1 square. And after that, they analyse looking at the light-squared bishop, developing all the way to the edge of the board.
OK, so the queen comes out, and then Black's bishop comes out to put some pressure on this knight. This bishop putting pressure on White's knight on an outpost. This bishop also putting pressure on the other white knight in the centre. And, OK, is Jan freestyling? Is he just... maybe has he studied this before? This is a bit of a strange move that he's just played. Instead of improving a piece, such as bringing the queen out to a very nice square, lining her up on this open file, he just pushes a pawn. Good strategy later, because the white king has some fresh air, some breathing space, but not really changing the position too much, not really activating his own pieces. Katrina, in general, do you prefer having long-term advantages, like, for example, here, White having the better pawn structure, or do you prefer the power of the bishops?
I think that long-term I would struggle with having the double the pawns, just because I am not very good at the endgames yet.
Yet. Good.
And so I would prefer to play White in this position just because it looks more dynamic and easier to play. But maybe this is easier for Magnus because he knows what he's doing. And I think that also the long-term goal maybe for Jan here is just pushing that pawn. Maybe it is to prevent the bishop to coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right, actually. The more I look at it, for example, if Black now pushes a pawn, kicking White's knight back, Black would love to create this type of pin, just annoying White's knight there, but that has been prevented by this innocent-looking pawn push. So, yeah, it's a real... I mean, it's a really tense position right now. It's not clear who has the advantage. I don't think either side will be thinking about the advantage, but it's just about whose plans are easier. And right now, in the current position, these pawns just ugly. Magnus needs to activate his pieces quickly. Otherwise, White will be able to target these guys. The reason we say they're ugly and weak is because they can't defend each other. And at some point later, we might see a plan such as White pushing a pawn forward, bringing the bishop out, and going for this front pawn. Especially this front pawn is extremely vulnerable. So, OK, let's go back to the players. It's early days, but as Katrina mentions, Magnus, he's clearly studied something similar to this before because he's played it earlier in the tournament. Jan may be less familiar with the ideas, but he must have studied it this morning. Otherwise, why else choose a line like this one, quite a rare variation.
And it was a king's pawn, right? King's pawn opening.
Yes.
Yes, and Chessable has a sale on the king's pawn opening right now. So head on to chessable.com to check out that sale and start practicing your own king's pawn opening.
Yeah, and we do have Magnus back. His camera is working. And as Jovanka mentioned, this bishop coming out, putting some pressure on the white knights. I don't think either of the black bishops actually want to trade themselves off for the knight. That would just be a fair exchange, and black needs to keep the long-term potential of those bishops alive. Meanwhile, white going for that move as well. That has been played before, has been analysed before. Bring the white queen out, just solidifying everything. White maybe is lagging behind slightly in development because white's bishop, if you look on the first rank, still at home asleep. So white still needs a couple of moves to connect the rooks, bring the rooks to the centre. Black does have access to some open lines. Oof, this one, I'm excited. I think it will be similar to yesterday where it's just imbalanced for a long time, and then players will start to take risks later in the game.
Yeah, and I do agree with you, David. I think it is kind of like white will be looking at controlling the position and eventually targeting those weak pawns, and also just maintaining control over the light squared bishop, because that's the bishop that's unopposed. And then black will just simply try to sharpen things up, you know, because they can't just sit there waiting. So I like the plan of, I was going to say kicking back the knight. Oh no, now it looks like I cheated. But anyway, I didn't. And the knight retreats and then seizing space. The player is playing incredibly quickly here.
Suddenly.
And Nepomniachtchi, true to style, you know, there's no waiting with him. That's what I noticed from yesterday's games. You know, he just, you know, he sees the plan, and often if he thinks it's good, he goes for it. Yeah. I remember we had like all sorts of subtle ideas, and you know, eventually doing something, and he was like, no, let's do it immediately.
Exactly. Trusting his instincts, and that's something that he lacked, or that he wasn't maybe able to do in the World Championship match. He was maybe thinking longer than normal. He was away from the board a lot during the World Championship, just kind of hiding in the rest room, just kind of maybe just not wanting to make that big decision. But yeah, this tournament he's been playing instantly, and it's been paying off for him. So, okay, this last move by white's bishop does attack that weak pawn that we mentioned, the front pawn of black's doubled c-pawns. And, okay, Magnus needs to either defend it. You could trade off the black knight for that white bishop, but then again, black's knight looks strong in the middle. Yeah. And, yeah, Katrina, are you a quick player? Are you quite an instinctive player? Or are you like me? Do you just get bogged down in all the decisions and become indecisive?
I think I am playing too quick of games. I don't do a lot of rapid games. And that's why, I think that's why I don't get into rook endgames or endgames in general, because I play too much blitz. So I don't get to learn them.
This time.
But here, like, getting the doubling of the pawns, do you think they would play differently if it was a classical game?
Possibly. I have a feeling Magnus would be reluctant to play this type of opening in classical games because, as Jovanka mentioned, white's idea is to keep control. It's easier to do that in long games. So if white is able to keep control, later the weakness of the black pawns would become the biggest factor in the position, maybe. But then again, in rapid, even if you lose a pawn, it's not the worst thing in the world. You just keep playing and you'll get chances later anyway. So, yeah, it definitely feels like this is part of Magnus's kind of speed chess repertoire, this opening. And, okay, meanwhile, he did trade off white's bishop. I'm slightly surprised. But then again, at least black's bishops now are unchallenged on the diagonals. And if things do open up later, they will become strong. For now, though, big threat. White's queen wants to go over and take a black pawn, one of those two double pawns.
Yeah, Magnus, the first one to take a longer thinking break in this game. And Katrina, Magnus became world champion in 2013. I remember myself living in Norway that the hype in Norway was just incredible. Everyone was staying home from work during lunch, watching the games in the World Championship match. Were you affected by that boom as well? Or did your chess interests simply come later?
It simply came later. Yeah. I'm really sorry to say that it didn't start earlier, but that's how it is. Yeah. Since I started in 2017, I didn't know much of these players, like the international players besides Magnus, because I saw him in the papers all the time. Yeah. But I think now that I'm in the game, I'm like, this is actually one of the best communities I've been part of, getting into the chess. And it's so much fun with this chess is not been solved, you know? So there's different challenges every time they go to the board.
Yeah. And do you have a favorite player? Is it Magnus being Norwegian, or do you have someone else that you think is entertaining to follow?
Actually, I would say that Judith Polgar.
Yeah.
I really like her games and her quickness when it comes to thinking. I really enjoy her when she plays, and maybe not so much anymore, but I looked at some of her games. I have to think they're really good. Yeah.
So what you always say, right, David? Find a player that you sort of want to play in their style and follow those games.
Yeah, and she plays really aggressive chess. And talking about aggressive chess, I have to take it back to the board because we just saw Magnus sacrifice a pawn, right, David?
Yeah, and that pawn offer was not accepted by Jan. Again, playing almost instantly. In this position, this pawn is up for grabs. Magnus has just moved his rook across, this rook sliding into the centre of the board, and the big question would have been, what happens if white takes this pawn? And to be honest, I think maybe he could have got away with it. Maybe he could have been greedy. I guess Magnus's idea, by clearing this square for his bishop on the last turn, moving his rook away, is to slide back, hitting the white queen. And when the white queen moves, I think she has to retreat, because a queen trade here would allow a nasty double attack, hitting the rook, hitting the knight. So if the white queen does retreat in this position, then Magnus has ideas such as pushing this pawn forward in the middle of the board. I'm not sure what order. Maybe you could take the knight first. Both are tempting. But for example, if you take the knight and then push your pawn in the centre, yes, white is a pawn up, but now white is the one with double pawns. Black gains a bit of space, gains some time against this knight, and wherever the knight moves, the pawns are starting to roll. Suddenly, black's pawns are moving fast down the board, and Kaja likes her nice pawn structures. This is a really well-fortified structure, and I think Nepomniachtchi just a bit too frightened of this, so he didn't get greedy, and if we catch up with the game situation, instead of taking this pawn off the board, he just dropped his knight back, maybe going after this pawn with his knight, and we actually see this in the game. Black now finally defending this pawn, and the attack continues against it with this knight maneuver. So a double attack, hitting this pawn with the knight and with the queen. And Magnus, I think he has to bank on just giving that pawn up at some point and starting to push his central pawns. Otherwise, if you go too passive, for example, if you drop your bishop back to defend it, black is just tied down. And top players, they hate being passive in these types of positions. So, OK, he doesn't go back. Instead, he trades off. And now he does drop back. OK, slightly surprising. But then again, at least he's doubled the white pawns as well. Really, yes, complex position strategically.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to mention that pawn structure. Take a look at the C-line. Have you ever seen four double pawns? And as we learned from Twitter, thank you very much for giving us this little rhyme. Double pawns are troubled pawns.
Yeah. So we have double trouble then.
Very good, Kaja.
It's like Pokemon. Team Rocket. Yeah.
And now the rook comes to the open line. And I have to say that I don't know whether I like Magnus's choice of giving up the bishop pair like this. I mean, I can see the pros to this. You know, you get that beautiful pawn structure and it's coming. But at the same time, the knight is the best placed weapon for a closed position. And this position is it's semi-closed, I would say. There's only one open line, and the knight is going to be much more powerful than the bishop.
Yeah, the bishop just tied down, indirectly defending its pawn. It's going to be stuck there for a long time. And you mentioned the one open line, Jovanka. Nepomniachtchi now is trying to dominate it. He's lifted his rook up the board, and we've talked about doubled pawns, but doubled rooks are even better. If white can double up his rooks, then he might try and break through on this file later. That's why Magnus has to challenge for the open file at some point. He does so immediately. And, OK, I'm just trying to work out what happens here, because rook takes rook would force black to move either his rook or his queen away. And no matter which piece you move away, you will allow white to take a pawn. I think his idea is to take with the rook if this happens, because now if white gets greedy and captures in the centre, it looks like a free pawn. White can grab it, but after a trade, you have to look and move further every time. You can't just stop here and think white is just a pawn up. You have to look further, and especially when it comes to checks. This is a check hitting the white king. The white king has somewhere to run, but suddenly at the very end, whoops, there is a nasty pin. The black bishop wins the white rook next move. So Magnus setting a nasty trap with that rook move he's just played, and OK, now challenging for this key file, the d file.
That really would have been an oh dear moment if white had fallen for that. Yeah.
I mean, that's the type of variation you look for first, right? And then you realise it doesn't work for white, and then Jan has to go back to square one and just improve a piece, as he does now.
Yep.
Those rooks look nice.
Yeah, white rooks look very good.
Yeah.
They do look very good. And now there is the concrete threat of actually playing rook takes rook. And so this is why Magnus just improves his pawn structure. He's getting ready for the endgame. He really is. You know, look at that beautiful pawn chain. And he's lengthened the scope of his dark square bishop, which before was just jammed in by its own pawns. And I think he's got his eye on that little... I think he's got his eye on a few things. One of the things I can think of is maybe at some later stage is to try to put the bishop on the longest diagonal. Another idea that he potentially has is to try to push his A pawn, Alice, up the board and try to destabilize the white knight. But that comes with kind of risk, because once you push a pawn forward, you can't take it back. And then another thing is just to maximize the pieces once all the pieces get traded off.
I think Magnus is just playing on general terms. If you have a dark squared bishop, you want your pawns on light squares, just so you can control both colour complexes. So, yeah, right now, very tense position. The computer undecided about who has the advantage, 0.0. That doesn't mean it's going to be a draw. Still a lot of life left. But it just shows both sides have chances. Both sides have pros and cons behind their position. Who do you prefer here, Katrina? I'm struggling to decide.
Still white, just because I would like to have the 4 pawns there on the queen side, actually.
Even if the 2 of them are double.
Yeah, because black's pawns are also doubled.
Yeah.
And if you get your knight moving, I think that knights can get really tricky and maybe affect the C pawn that is like on the back rank. Yeah, I don't know if I would like being black here. So he goes for trading off and then going into quick endgame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm slightly surprised, because because white's queen has now stepped back, so black cannot challenge for this open file anymore. White has full control with the white queen and rook of this line. So, yeah, it's a slightly surprising decision by Magnus. Maybe he wants to continue pushing on the side he's stronger, where black has the 4 versus 3 advantage on the right half of the board. That pawn majority is quite mobile, so it can be pushed easily. White's pawn majority, however, on the other side, a bit stuck. And yeah, your point, Katrina, about the doubled pawns. The difference, if we look on the C file, black's doubled pawns can't be defended by other pawns. They have to be defended by pieces, whereas white's doubled pawns can actually be defended by other pawns as well. So white's pawn mass over there can defend each other. So strategically, white has an advantage with pawn structure still. But there we go, the white knight getting involved. And this is your idea, right?
Yeah.
Attacking some pawns.
Yeah. Very good to see that they are doing what I am also thinking. Everything here. So they're playing rather quickly, I think, as well. So
definitely. Yeah. Look at Jan, still 12 minutes on the clock.
But I've noticed that Magnus is actually copying this pattern as well, because he's like, okay, you know, this is your strong point. You want to kind of make me feel like I should be a little bit intimidated. I'm also going to play quickly. And I have to say, I really do love Magnus's last 2 moves, because he maximized the queen and then he's actually maximized the rook. And like David mentioned, those pawns, they're going to start marching. And I don't know, unless white can do something on the left side, he's going to be in a bit of a pickle, as we say in the UK. Yeah. I don't know how that originated, don't ask me. But, you know, you can just see that that pawn is going to become pass pawn. Maybe white's king is going to start to feel a little bit shaky, and, yeah.
Some real attacking ideas against the white king, actually. One idea might be to bring the bishop out and line it up on this diagonal with the black queen to try and sneak in towards the white king. That would be very, very strong. And as Jovanka mentioned, just the brute force approach, the caveman approach would be to just push pawns, hope for the best. And white has to be careful. If you try and get active with the white queen, which is very tempting, maybe jumping into the position, attacking some pawns over here, attacking this pawn with the white knight, then suddenly the white queen has abandoned any defense of her own king, and black will start pushing forward with his own pawns, weakening things up, loosening the white king. And for example, if a capture happens, then now I would be very scared here with white, because suddenly checkmating ideas with the queen, or by taking this pawn maybe as well with a nasty check, suddenly a lot of threats against the white king. So, yeah, things are quite urgent here for Jan Nepomniachtchi. It feels like he should be OK somehow. Just his knight could potentially be very good, but temporarily at least, it's not participating in the defence. And if he can't get active, if he can't win this pawn over the next few moves, then suddenly the trend might turn in Magnus's favour. Yeah, I agree with Jovanka. This last move, it's not obvious, actually. Just defending this pawn, kind of abandoning the back rank for black. It's not a normal type of move that we would see, but very effective by Magnus. And I think we've already seen Jan spend 2 minutes. I think we'll see him spend even longer now because it is a critical moment. One slip and black's attack might suddenly get really scary.
Definitely. Sorry for kind of like having a big smile on my face, because when David was showing that line, I had Simon's voice in my head going, "Welcome to the danger zone." I couldn't shake it, and so I just started laughing. It wasn't at your analysis.
We've been corrupted by the Ginger GM.
Yeah, we have.
What was the right lyrics?
Highway to the danger zone.
Highway to the danger zone, not welcome to the danger zone. But I
kind of like welcome to the danger zone better. I think it fits.
Welcome to. Well, is this welcome to the danger zone? This game is any of them feeling worried right now? You're talking about the white king potentially being very vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, the more I look at the position, the more I get worried for white. And I think it's the same for Jan. He played super quickly up to this point, and then now investing over 3 minutes. And I doubt we'll see a move over the next minute or two because it is so complicated. I'm looking and I don't see a move that kind of gets that white knight back involved towards the centre. If you could pick up that white knight and plant it in the centre somewhere, or even on the king's side, maybe to attack attack black's rook, then white would be doing great. But yeah, that white knight not looking like it's in its shining armour right now. Just abandoned its own king. And Magnus looking pretty chilled.
Yeah, and look, I noticed Magnus usually drinks water. He always has a bottle of water. But today it's something different, isn't it? Could be water, of course, in that bottle, but maybe it's like some sort of soda or something. Get some energy.
It could be maybe an electrolyte drink. I've heard that that's quite popular. I remember when he was younger, he
always orange juice.
Always orange juice, but then he kind of consulted a professional nutritionist, and the nutritionist said, no, you've got to stay away from the orange juice and the raisins because this is going to give you a sugar spike. And that's why he kind of went to water. I was going to say, I don't think he drinks coffee or tea.
No, I think we always just see the water,
It's the same in classical chess. He very rarely touches the hot drinks. I think coffee, he's scared that the caffeine hit will be at the wrong moment in the game and that he'll have a bit of a dip afterwards. And I wonder if the nutritionist advised him to eat the noodles, which we see nearly every day now on the Champions Chess Tour. But yeah, either way, I think Magnus will be the happier of the two. And okay, there we go. White pushes a pawn. Again, pros and cons behind this last move. White's king has a bit more breathing space. But then again, black's pawns maybe have a target now. This white pawn stepping forward could be undermined by some of the black pawns later in the game. And the evaluation bar slightly over to black's side after this last move. It was a difficult situation, though. Nepomniachtchi had to find something. And this one makes some sense. I like the fact he's kept his queen down here. Just now, if any of the black pawns advance, the white queen might be able to just capture. So, yeah, very, very tense in this position.
Yeah, looking at Nepomniachtchi, you can see he actually did the exact same movement as you, David. You were like, pros and cons with that, and Jan did the same thing. It looked like he also felt that, okay, it's a good move, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, and for me, that happens every time I play a move in chess. I'm just never sure. Looks good, but doesn't feel right. But yeah, I think the same stuff's going through Jan's head right now. Normally, he's a very positive player. He doesn't show it in interviews. You see him shaking his head, criticising his own play. But ever since he was young, when I first met him, I think he was 9 years old, he was always, whenever you analyse with him, he always thinks he's winning. He always sees the positives in his own position. But right now, there are definitely some negatives as well. That's why, hence the kind of maybe bobbing of the head.
Yeah.
But yeah, also we talked about superstitions with Jan's T-shirt, wearing it and playing so well the whole tournament. Magnus yesterday started the day with the white pieces. He had a white shirt. Today starting with the black pieces, black shirt. I don't know if that's
we saw that in the World Championship match, right?
Talking about superstitions, what about your tie? What inspired the chess-themed tie?
Yeah, the chess tie. Partly it's become routine. Last season of the Champions Chess Tour, always in the final, I whip out the tie. But also, it's for peace. Today, it's for peace.
Yes, it's very nice. Do you also have the chess socks?
Not today. Actually, I left the flat, and as soon as I left the flat, I realised I forgot to wear them.
Oh.
Next time.
Next time.
Claire.
Yeah, you still have 8 tournaments to go, David. 8 finals to go to bring out the chess socks as well. All right. Well, now it's Magnus Carlsen in a pause, thinking. We did have quite a lot of time trouble yesterday as well.
Yeah, understandable because the games were just so complicated and really nervy for both sides. I think we're going to see the same today.
Yeah.
I'm surprised Magnus is thinking right now I would just start pushing some pawns maybe towards the black king. I know exactly what Simon Williams would do, Ginger GM. He would pick up the black h pawn, harry, and march it down the board. Because if you look at white pawn, it's covering the dark squares, the white pawn that has just pushed. If you push harry down the board a few squares...
Two squares.
2 squares,
Okay.
yeah, and then push it again next move, you'll, even if it comes at the cost of a pawn, you kind of destabilize white structure, you break up the white pawns, and this is just very typical, very thematic idea, especially once white has pushed this pawn, the g pawn, forward in front of the king. And every time I've played Simon Williams, as soon as I touch my g pawn with white with black, harry runs down the board, and it's so annoying. I know what's coming, but it's so hard to deal with. And especially in rapid chess, I think that would be quite effective.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I was also considering that move, but I also had a second move as a kind of candidate as well. And that was actually moving the bishop 1 square. So, you know, we see this beautiful geometric pattern on the C line. Why not have it on the E line as well? Now, and I wanted to move my bishop there. So it would be bishop, rook, and queen. And the idea is not to just appreciate the beauty of chess on the board, but it's actually to push forward the G pawn.
Okay, yeah, push this guy forward
Yeah.
in order to push the f pawn forward, in order to push the e pawn forward. It's like...
Sounds like a good rhyme there.
yeah.
What happens if you
logical.
push the g pawn now?
Yeah, I think black would love to do this, but at the moment it could be captured, I guess. Queen takes pawn would be a check. Your idea, Katrina, maybe to slide the rook across?
Yeah.
Yeah, to go for the white queen. Actually, this is really
That is
To
really
open the
dangerous,
fire.
actually.
creative.
Nice, Katrina.
Yeah, giving up a pawn, but sometimes pawns aren't so important. Now the rook on the same file as the white king. The white queen has to budge. If she goes to a bad square, for example, if she... OK, he challenges the white queen, but I like this. Now you start rolling with the pawns. Yeah. Maybe Magnus saw something like this. Maybe he was calculating it for the last couple of minutes, but yeah, risky for both sides, I guess. And he's played a slightly safer move in the end, Magnus, instead of going for this, which actually, the more I look at it, the more I like it. Magnus sliding his rook across, hitting the white queen, and we do see a rook trade. Wow, OK. I think, in general, a rook trade favours white because black's pawns are going to become even weaker. Now the black rook is off the board, unable to defend them, but Magnus has a specific idea in mind. He's pushing forward. He's trying to break through to the white king. Even with rooks off the board, the white king might become a big target. And I don't think you can really allow this pawn to march forward 2 squares away from its end goal, but you might have to, because if pawn takes pawn, then black won't take this guy. Black will take the other pawn instead with a check. And suddenly everything falls with check. This king has to move. If you go to the corner, check. If you move, check. Every pawn falls, and black is simply winning. So really, really dangerous position here for Jan Nepomniachtchi. Maybe you have to stop this pawn with your king. I think you have to stop it either with your queen, blockading right now, or you have to step your king across to stop its advance. Either way, Magnus setting some real problems for Jan Nepomniachtchi.
Yeah, definitely. White already in a little bit of danger, and I think the 2 moves that you highlighted are totally vital. I mean, I can't see anything else. I mean, if you allow that pawn 1 square forward,
it's just going to be
game over, right? And especially because the promotion square is on a dark square, the same colour as the bishop, which kind of might seem elementary, but these are the things that do help you when you're making those assessments. And he has stopped that pawn by moving his queen.
Yeah.
So why didn't he take it with his pawn?
Yeah, so taking this pawn would have allowed the black queen to pounce and take this guy, and suddenly all of the white pawns are weak. This is a check, and these 2 white pawns will also drop off over the next couple of turns. So, yeah, you couldn't open up your king yet. Jan is saying, OK, you can open the king, but it's on his terms. And with this queen move, blockading black's pawn, now if we see black's pawn capture, then white will simply take back with the king. And actually, everything's defended. A queen trade doesn't favour black because the pawns will just... Oh, whoops, sorry. The pawns will just drop off a bit later on. And meanwhile, the white king protects the queen and protects this pawn. That would all be fine for white. So Magnus says, OK, let's keep that tension, bringing his bishop into the game. And, wow, just giving up a pawn even. If this pawn is captured, I think Magnus's idea is to maybe try and trap this knight. You could do that. I mean, firstly, you can step into the centre of the board, but I'm wondering where the escape square is if the queen drops back. Maybe this knight is just trapped.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you can also attack the knight from another square on the D line, and then try to come in with your queen. And
This looks even stronger, maybe. Bring the queen in now, and suddenly white is going to be overwhelmed. If a queen trade happens, this pawn becomes a new queen. So dangerous still for Jan Nepomniachtchi.
So the bar is just the 0.0 all the way in the middle.
As
just
always.
saying dead draw. But
no play.
Yeah. But I'm sensing on you guys that this could be dramatic, and especially for Jan Nepomniachtchi.
Yeah, totally. One wrong move, and we saw it yesterday, you know, when the players kept blundering. You know, one bad move changed the whole nature of the game, and suddenly, you know, chess is like that. Life can be unfair. Chess is unfair at times. And I mean, here Nepomniachtchi decides that, OK, let's retreat the knight, let's try to get that into the action. But, OK, I always try to look at the consequences of each move that's been played.
I mean, knights are just great defenders, and I think he's trying to rush that knight back in case it needs to defend its king. And this is the type of position we could see the evaluation bar, if Jan does make a slip, just shoot off and be completely winning for black. I don't think, meanwhile, we'll see it go the other way. Not so drastically, at least. It might go for a slight advantage to white if white is able, for example, to take the queens off or at least survive this incoming attack. Then, OK, the attack continues. Pawns are marching forward. And, just trying to open the white king. This is consistent. Jan, meanwhile, frowning. I'm not sure whether he's frowning because he doesn't like his position. I wouldn't like white's position. Or maybe he's just confused by this last move. Maybe he was expecting something different. But would you be scared here, Katrina? Pawns marching down.
Yeah, as white, definitely. And I wanted to also mention that, like, the bar is saying that it's a dead draw if they play this right. But for me, playing this psychologically, that would be really tough because it looks so hard. Yeah. Like, when you're having your black pawns coming into your king's area and then there's still a queen on the board, I feel that this is really threatening for Magnus.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's psychology here. And, computers, they'll defend perfectly, of course. They're cold-blooded. But, for a human, pawns marching in your face. White is the one retreating. White's knight had to come back from where it just jumped to a few moves ago. White had to find pretty much an only move or one of the only moves with that queen blockade earlier. Now the black bishop getting active. Yeah, you're completely right. This is scary still for white.
And now the white king is very open, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's lost its clothes, lost its bodyguards, those white pawns. The white pawn shelter completely destroyed. But then again, white's queen will act as a good defender. Any checks that come, she will blockade. So, it feels so dangerous for white, but maybe Jan still has things under control for now. And if he does trade queens, things might turn back in white's favour.
OK, so he's definitely going to try to trade the queens now. OK.
Because his king is in danger, and when your king is in danger, it's almost always a good rule of thumb to swap off queens.
Writing it down.
Yeah, because the queen is the most dangerous attacking piece.
Okay.
So, try and trade off the queens.
Yeah, because if you look at this position, white's queen will never be anything more than a defender. Black's queen can do everything, pretty much. Also, queens are best right in the... I mean, most pieces are best right in the centre of the board, but especially queens. Because look how many squares the black queen covers. On the queen side, king side, I mean, vertically, horizontally, the black queen covers everything. White's queen now getting ready to maybe offer a trade, also staring at some of the black pawns. And Magnus, will he push Harry finally? I'm waiting for that move to arrive.
I'm waiting for that as well, because I really do think that Magnus has to bank on the fact that the white knight is out of play, it's offside, and instead he needs to initiate play on the right side, because that's where he's strongest.
Exactly. Actually, if you look at the positioning of the two pieces, black's bishop completely dominates the white knight in terms of the white knight retreating and jumping over to the other side of the board. That's why a lot of top grandmasters prefer the bishops, just because they can control the knights. It's very rare to see a knight completely dominate a bishop. Sometimes it happens, depending on the pawn structure, but bishops regularly, they control both sides of the board. They can dominate a knight. OK, right now, Magnus down on the clock.
Yeah.
He needs to decide, does he go and defend the pawn that white's queen is attacking on the diagonal? He drops his bishop back. Clever move, maybe, because now if white's queen gets greedy and goes and captures a black pawn on the left side of the board, the black queen will come down and create some nuisance.
And, well, Nepomniachtchi is showing that, you know, if your position is bad, you might as well go for material. And he's moved his knight to the edge.
And finally, the bar reacts.
Yeah, it didn't quite like it.
I mean, it just feels inconsistent from Nepomniachtchi. Earlier, he moved his knight to this square. A few moves later, he moved it back. Then he moved it back again. He has won a pawn, however. White is a pawn up. But the checks have begun. White's king, will it survive this onslaught? You can block it with your queen, this check, or you can move the white king away. Big decision for Nepomniachtchi. I don't think black is risking anything because at the very least there'll be checks forever. You can probably repeat the position with some checks later on. But either way, yeah, Magnus trying to sneak towards that white king.
I was thinking, you know, block it with the queen. This is choices, or run away with the king. I'm just working it out. I'm just thinking maybe you have to block it with the queen to, first of all, attack the dark square bishop and maybe give some air for your king to run if necessary.
Towards the centre, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if the white queen moves and blocks this check, we're expecting it to go to the light square, then at least the white king can use the square that the white queen currently sits on to run towards the centre. I don't think the white king's going to be entirely safe on the back rank on the first row. And there we see it. The computer confirms the queen block was by far the best move. Now things are all in black's favour.
Wow.
I mean, such a tightrope to walk. I mean, finding only moves in this position is incredibly hard. White had three options there. He chose the wrong one, though. And now this check, blocked by white's queen. Can Magnus continue? Can he press this advantage? It's still not clear, to be honest, from a human point of view, exactly how to punish white. You could give a check from the black queen. You definitely don't want to trade off now. The queen's white's a pawn up, so you could bring the black queen back, actually park it next to the white knight and check the white king on the diagonal. That's one option. I mean, for me, I'm struggling to see anything else, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm struggling to see anything else. Like I saw an almost checkmate, but it didn't quite happen.
Okay.
The almost checkmate is I would need my black pawn to mysteriously appear on a different square on g4, and then I could have like a nice bishop check. But that's kind of like dreamland there.
We can show this actually, maybe. So right now it doesn't quite work, but if black had this extra move of having this pawn on this square, maybe he'll try and repeat the moves and then flick his pawn to this square later. But if the pawn was there, for example, just to show you Vanka's idea, a bishop check, drawing out the white king, luring it out into the open, and this would be a nice, pretty checkmate. The kiss of death checkmate. Is that what it's called?
No, it's called something else, but I can't remember.
Okay. All checkmates have a name. And,
I think it's called the cozy, but I've forgotten.
How are you with your checkmates, Katrina? In your games, do you often go all the way to checkmate?
Yes.
Yeah?
Somebody told me that, like, since we are new into chess, you should go the entire game and see how it goes. Because especially when it comes to classic games, you can learn from your positions when you get to the end game. Even though you're losing, maybe you learn how the rooks work together, or maybe the pawns are some strategies you can learn about. And I think it's important for especially us new players to do this.
Plus, it's entertaining to see those checkmates. Okay, what's going on?
Okay, we've just seen Magnus repeat the position. I don't think he wants to go for the draw. I think he's just gaining time on the clock because he is down to around a minute now. But this is the second time we've seen this position. If the black queen jumps down to the first rank and gives another check and then goes back where she came from, it's just going to be a draw. Magnus, I think he can still use his bishop, but there is risk involved and he's low on the clock. Is he going to bail out, play it safe now with black, or is he going to press for the win? He does play for the win. Not the move we expected, just taking a time out, defending his pawn, keeping it on a safe square. But Jovanka, you thought that was better.
I thought that he was actually going to step his bishop one square forward and try to kind of box the king in some mating net, but no.
No, and now the white queen sliding across. Now she has some threats. She wants to go up to the middle of the board, check the black king and trade off the queens. Maybe just giving white this one move of respite, one move, has just changed things. Because now, how do you trap that white king? The white king has a path out into the open again. And so, okay, maybe Magnus missing a big opportunity there. And frowning, look at Magnus, just not too happy. And shaking his head as well. I think he just felt, his instincts would have told him there was a good move there. I mean, often in these positions, especially with queens on the board, you see so many different checks, you see so many different options. It's hard with 1 minute to work them all out. And he would have known there was something in the position, but he just didn't have enough time to find it. And there we go, white's king stepping out of the check.
Does Jan have winning chances as well, or is he only trying to save a draw?
If Magnus pushes too hard, if the queens come off, Jan has great winning chances.
Okay.
But it looks like Magnus now, having let things slip, having shaken his head, he's going to try and escape from this position with a draw. This is the second time we've seen this position as well. We've seen the players repeat once. If Black's queen goes back and gives a check, we're going to see a draw. White's king stepping into the corner. There we go. First result of the day.
Wow, it's quite a long game. 46 moves. They played for 45 minutes.